Alright, we're doing red, green, multicolored and the rest today. So first let's talk about the red guilds. We have Timur, Mardu and Jeskai. And these are mostly all somewhat aggressive. Timur is the least aggressive of these. But they are all assertive, and the Jeskai is mostly a tempo deck. Want to have prowess creatures and flyers. Mardu is a little more go wide. The first act of treason, 2 and a red for a sorcery. You gain control of a creature until the end of turn. You untap it and it gains haste. This card doesn't really have a home in this format, so it's mostly a D-. There is no like black-red sack deck. But you can play this sometimes in Jeskai if you're super aggressive and this card does trigger prowess and all that. And sometimes you can steal a 4-powered creature to give you ferocious, but mostly it's a D-. You can get to like a C- in some aggressive Jeskai decks, but you don't have to pick it very high anyway. Einok Tracker, another medium morph here, 5 and a red for a 3/3. It has first strike and it has morph 4 and a red, so it's usual 5 rule. First strike means that this will sometimes eat something when you flip it up. Sometimes it doesn't get through because your opponent has too high of a toughness creatures. I think this is another C-. It's a card that can't be that bad because it's a morph, but it's still not one of the best ones. Next, Arc Lightning. Very powerful card. 2 and a red for a sorcery, and it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures and no players. So what often happens with this card is that you kill a morph and deal 1 to your opponent. If you're really lucky, you can kill a morph and a 1 toughness creature. This card is solid, but I don't think it's that great of a card, because when your opponent starts flipping up morphs, this is not going to kill the relevant stuff. It can be really good against Jeskai, though, like killing the 2/1 flyer plus a morph. I think Arc Lightning is around a C+ and a B-. Does go face if you need it to. It's a good card. I would always play it, but I wouldn't like pick it super high. I just don't think that the creatures in this era of Magic started to become a little bit too large for this card to be that good. And Cast of the Creatures is the most insanely aggressive format. But still a good card, C+ B-. Arrowstone, 3 red for a sorcery. It deals 4 damage to target creature or player. So it does deal damage to players, which we don't actually see that often anymore. And it has raid and then it deals 5. So this is a good finisher. It can also be like just a okay removal spell. It's pretty clunky as a removal spell, and if you want to raid this, you can't kill a 5 toughness creatures before combat, so you have to wait after the combat. You can of course kill a 4 toughness creatures, but I think this is around a C, but this could also be a little bit of a game plan for your deck. Let's say you're some sort of aggressive Jeskai and Mardu deck. You can get your opponent into range, and maybe you get your opponent down to 10 and you finish the game with 2 of these. So I think it's mostly a C, but some decks may want it around a C+. Next card is great. It's Ashcloud Phoenix, 2 red for a 4/1 flyer, so it's very fragile, but it does have evasion. But when it dies, you return it to the battlefield face down, so it becomes a 2/2 morph, and you can flip it up for 6 mana. This is the kind of morph that you're not unhappy to just play on 4 mana. You can play it as a morph too, but the risk about that is that you play it and your opponent kills it, and then it's not going to come back. But you will do that if you have to. But this is a card you can slam on turn 4, and if your opponent kills it, it's going to eventually come back. And if your opponent's got 2 removal spells, well, you still 2-for-1 your opponent. So I think this is a A. It's just a fantastic card. It's a little better if you are aggressive, because yes, you can block with this. It's still a fine blocker. It blocks and comes back. But if your opponent is beating you down pretty hard, you may not have time to do all this stuff. But it's still an A, fantastic card. And next is an interesting card. It's a Barrage of Boulders. 2 and a red for a sorcery, and it is 1 damage to each creature you don't control. And if you have ferocious, creatures can't block this turn. So this is not creatures without flying, it's all creatures. So if you got ferocious, this is very similar to Hazardous Blast. I think this card on average is going to be worse than Hazardous Blast, because Hazardous Blast always does its thing. But this card is 1 mana cheaper, but by the time you cast this card, it's doesn't really matter, it costs 3 mana. I still think it's a role player. In a Temur deck, this is the kind of card that you may want, because Temur's got A, big creatures, and B, it's gonna get to ferocious pretty easily, and then you may want to just finish the game. And it may have problem with some flyers. The other use case for this is just sided in against a deck with a lot of 1 toughness creatures like a Mardu or Jessica deck. All in all, I think this is about a C, but it could be an important role player. I don't think it's good if you have not had to have that many creatures. Next card is another interesting card, Blood Fairy Expert, 2 and a red for a 3/1 prowess. So it's like the reverse of the white one, but you even have to pay 1 mana more and it's more fragile. It does attack harder, and also this card works with the previous card, Barrage of Boulders, because if you cast Barrage of Boulders, Blood Fairy Expert goes up to 4 before the spell resolves, so it will check that. So you can just imagine a deck with a bunch of Blood Fairy Experts and Barrage of Boulders. Maybe you throw the 4/2 prowess in there, and that's a deck. I think still Blood Fairy Expert is not better than a C-, but it is nice that it only takes 1 spell to make this enable all the ferocious stuff. So it definitely has a home, but it is of course pretty fragile. It also is pretty bad against Barrage of Boulders because your opponent kills this right away. Blood Fairy Mentor, 2 and a red for a O-Fire. Play 2 and a blue to loot. Unfortunately, this card is not very good at anything it does. It's a 0/5 for free, which is traditionally not a very good card in Limited, especially in this format where people start flipping up morphs. And some of the morphs will just eat this, like the 5/3 black creature. There are some gold morphs like the Snowhorn Rider that will just eat this. The Absent card will gain 4 life every time. And the looting is very clunky. So this is a card that's bad at everything it does, but it does some amount of things. So I think it's a D+, not like the absolute worst card in the world, but it's bad at everything it does, even though it does a lot of similar things. Let's see here, Alright, we're back with the next page. Bring Low, 3 and a red for instant. It deals 3 damage to target creature. If that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, it deals 5 damage to it instead. So it's sort of pretty good against Absent, or some card that's been hit by a feat of resistance and got bigger. This is sort of like a Throttle. I think it's a little better than Throttle because it's 1 mana cheaper and sometimes it will deal 5. But it's not a great card. The problem is that 3 damage for 4 mana is just a little too slow. So I think it's about a C-, but you will play these in your Jeskai deck. It does trigger your prowess card, and even Team will play one sometimes. And you will have some matchups where it's pretty good against Absent. Like 4 mana deal 5 is a pretty solid card, but 4 mana deal 3 is not. So that's the problem. So like the next one better, Burn Away, 4 and a red for an instant, and deals 6 damage to target creature, and it doesn't have to have any counters for it to deal 6. And when that creature dies, it's turn exile all cards from its controller's graveyard. So that hoses Delve pretty good, as well as all other graveyard shenanigans. So it's got some extra value against Salta. There are some matches where the exile in the graveyard doesn't matter too much. But I guess it's pretty good against Ashcloud Phoenix. I think it works, but anyway. So I much rather have this because I'd rather pay an extra mana to be sure I kill the creature. It's still not a fantastic card because 5 mana is a lot, but I will give this a C+, because it's also an instant, which is nice. It has triggers prowess. So C+ for Burn Away. I like it more than Bring Low. So if I have a choice between those two, I will take Burn Away. Next up, Canyon Lurkers, 4 and a red for a 5/2. It's got more 3 and a red. So pretty simple card. Again, another C-. The problem with this card is that 2 toughness is just too fragile. This, even when you flip this up, it will still trade for an unflipped morph. But it gives you ferocious. Sometimes you will attack into a wall. You attack into the 0/5 flyer, for example. And then it's gonna be sweet. And it does work somewhat well with Barrage of Boulders because 5 power is a lot to have unblockable later in the game. So I think it's a C-. You can bump it up to a C if you got some ferocious stuff like the Barrage of Boulders. Next we have the Fireball of the set, Creator's Claws, X and a red for a sorcerer. It is X damage to target creature or player. But if you got ferocious, it is that X +2. This is a great card because Fireball is already a pretty solid card. It's about a B-, I want to say. Modern Limited, Fireball has lost a little bit of its potions because creatures are so big. But this one, the fact that it deals 2 extra is just huge. That just makes your opponents going to be in range of the burning to the face much more often. And also you can have some insane turns on turn 5 where you like cost this for 3 mana and then it deals 4. And you can double spell and have some great turns. It's also gonna kill most things when you have Ferocious, as well as going to the face. I think it's a solid B+. And this card could just be your game plan, just kill your opponent. Dragon Grip, 2 and a red for an aura. And it's got Ferocious. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you may cast it as though it has flash. And it's a chance of creating just +2/+0 and first strike. So it's sort of like a common these days. It does stay around though. So if you don't have Ferocious when you cast it, you will have afterwards. It's not a great card though. It's nice that you can win a combat, but +2/+0 and first strike are good. But again, auras is not like a theme in this set. I will give it like a C-. Not a fantastic card. It's a little out of place here. It does good things, and having +2/+0 stick around is nice. But it's the fact that it doesn't always have. If this always had flash, it would be much higher. But it's gonna only have flash when you have Ferocious, and then you may not even need it. So there's power here, but the fact that if you're causing this sorcery speed, you're not happy. Dragon Style Twins, 3 red for a 3/3. Very simple card, honestly. It's got 2 keywords, double strike and prowess. 2 cards that goes very well together because it's almost like this card has double prowess, because double strike means that you're gonna get to hit for 2 times. Yeah, this is just a great card. I think it's about a B+. It's a little fragile to removal, and it can get jumped. But if you throw in some trample on this, it gets silly pretty fast, because then you're gonna trigger prowess too. So it's a B+, I think. Doesn't really get to the A level because sometimes it's not that great when you're behind. But it's of course a fantastic card with like the Barrage of Boulders, because this will get up to 4 power and then your opponent taking 8 from this card alone. So great card. And this is a card that would make me want to play some trample tricks maybe. There is one in green that gives +3/+3 and trample. And that's a pretty good thing to do in Teamer. Goblin Slide, that's a little bit of a meme card. 2 and a red for enchantment. When you cast a non-creature spell, you may pay 1. If you do, get a 1/1 with haste. Which is not has not the easiest time to get through. I think this might be even worse than the blue one. I don't like this card. I think it's a D. But if you got a lot of non-creature spells and not too many payoffs, you can throw this one in there and like pretend you have a good payoff. It does some things. And the 1/1s are, if you can trade off with them, maybe you can double block when you got a couple. It will do some things, just not very good. Horde Ambush is one of the medium morphs that are a solid card, but not as good as the other ones, I think. 1 red for a 2/2, and when it blocks, it deals 1 damage to you. Not a big deal, but it's a little annoying. But morph, you can reveal a red card in your hand, and when it turns face up, target creature can't block this turn. This is, I think, worse than the other ones, because the ability is not that good. And if you play this for 3 mana, flip it up, you haven't really got an advantage as far as size goes, whereas some of the others gets like flying, or becomes an 0/6, or becomes a Death Toucher. So I think it's a C. It's not a bad card, of course. It's a morph, and you can just play it for 2. But if you cast this on 2 mana, it's like a 2 mana with a downside. So it's a C. It's not a terrible card. Hordeling Outburst, 1 red for a sorcery. You get 3 1/1 goblins. I like this card. It also triggers prowess, as well as being a creature, so you don't even have to lower your creature count. This is fantastic in a Mar to go wide deck. The biggest problem with this card is the mana, because if you're a 3-color deck, having red can be a little bit of a problem, especially on turn 3. So it's a good card though. I would give it around a C+, and it can get to B- if your mana is good. Maybe you're a Mardu deck with good mana. You have some tap lands, maybe you have a fetch land, tri-land, then it becomes better. The biggest thing that holds this back is the mana, because if you're casting this on turn 5, and maybe you don't even can cast another spell, it's not that much better than a mediocre card. So if your mana is good, I like it, but the mana holds it back pretty significantly. Howl of the Horde, this is an interesting card. 2 and a red for a sorcerer. When you cast the next instant sorcerer spell this turn, copy it. You may choose new targets. But if you raid, you get to copy it twice. So if you can get to 8 mana, you can have Arrow Storm and deal 15. I guess that's the dream. Also, maybe you can have like a Treasure Cruise, draw 9 cards. I remember people gave this an F mostly, but I thought that this card could have a home. If you're like a blue-red deck, Jeskai deck, probably maybe Teamer, with maybe you have Treasure Cruise and an Arrow Storm, I can see this card doing things. It's gonna have a wide range. It's gonna be games where this card does stone nothing. It's gonna be games where you can't raid, you have no creatures in play, and then it's pretty clunky and bad. But there are some dreams you can do here with Arrow Storm. So I want to give this a build around C+, in a deck that has Arrow Storms, Treasure Cruise with no other delve, unreasonable amount of creatures. The stars has to align pretty hard, but I think that this card has potential. I wouldn't just write this one off. I would not pick it very highly because you probably don't have to, but I would give it a build around C+. If all the stars align, it can be a pretty sweet card that actually is good. Jeering Instigator, 1 on red for a 2/1. It's got Morph 2 and a red, and return face up, you get to active treason, a creature. Very powerful, you almost never want to cast this on turn 2, but I mean, if you have to, you have to. But the fact that it gets control of a creature can lead to a huge swing, sort of like a Zealous Conscript, except the body is of course worse. But you can't ambush things, like you can't do that with Zealous Conscript anyway, but I'm just saying you have to be your turn. So you can do some weird stuff in combat, you can steal a blocker, but I just don't think that does much. It becomes a rules headache. But it's a very solid card, I think it's about a B- if you're aggressive. There are some games where it's not going to do that much, but there are some games where it's going to be sick. You just act of treason something and you didn't really pay much for it because you just played a morph, and it's solid, or B-, I think. Leaping Master, 1 and a red for a 2/1. You can pay 2 and a white to give it flying until end of turn. So in Jeskai or Mardu, that's a thing. In Teamer, this is not a playable card, unless you want a Goblin Piker. It's not a great card, it's pretty mana intensive, but it is nice that you can play this early, and then later in the game when you've got no other things to do with your mana, you have a little bit of an evasive card. I think it's a C-, though it's nothing special. C- in Jeskai and Mardu. The fact also that it costs, if you want to enable raid with this card, give it flying, you may not have the mana left to do for the raid. So that's a little expensive. If it costed 2 mana, it would be higher, because then it would be better with raid. Mardu Blazebringer, 2 and a red for a 4/4. When it attacks or blocks, sacrifices at the end of combat. Pretty bad card. You have a one-shot attacker or blocker. It does give you Ferocious, but that's about the best thing I can say about it. I think it's a D-. Maybe if you're like desperate to have a Ferocious card, you can put it in there. The problem, of course, is that if you have like Barrage of Boulders, this only gets to hit once, so it's not even that good. Next, we have a great card on Mardu Heartpiecer, 3 and a red for a 2/3. And raid, it gets to shock anything, creature or player. I guess not a planeswalker. But the fact that we have morphs in this set makes this card so good, because oftentimes people are playing morph. So you play a morph on turn 3, your opponent plays a morph on turn 3, you attack. I guess maybe your opponent played 2 morphs. Maybe you played something that can attack. Now you can kill the morph. Maybe your opponent has 2 morphs, but it also kills small flyers and evasive threats. It's at its best in Jeskai or Mardu, you can attack more reliably. But I think it's a B-. It's a solid card that picks off irrelevant stuff. The body is a little meh, but when you're getting 2 for 1, you can't really ask for that much. Mardu Warshrieker, another raid card here. 3 and a red for a 3/3. And if you raid it, you get 3 mana. So then you can cast like a morph. That's a pretty common pattern, is that you attack on turn 4, you play this and then immediately play a morph. Or you can use the mana to cast something else. It's hard to flip up a morph with the mana though, because most morph cost isn't free, but there are some. Does not enable raid, it's not a warrior. I think it's about a C. I think this card plays out a little bit worse than it looks, because there are some games where you can't even use the mana. But it works pretty nicely also with the raid cards, like the White Horde. If you play this, you have enabled raid, and you can cast a 2/3 that makes a 1/1. And the board becomes pretty large pretty fast. But it is a little feast or famine. There are games where this card doesn't do much. Maybe you're behind, or maybe you can't use the mana that good. So I think it's just a C, but it's a card you can put in your deck and not be too unhappy about it. Monastery Swift, this is a card that is much, much worse in Limited than it is in Constructed. Red mana for a 1/2 with haste and prowess. It's not a terrible card, but and it is better than the white card. Don't expect too high things about the Swift Spear though. If I am Mardu, it's okay. If I'm Teamer, I don't want it. If I'm Yes Guy, then it becomes so much better. But I would give Monastery Swift to around a C. And don't expect too high things about this, because at the end of the day, this is just a 1-powered creature for 1 mana. And you may get some hits in, but then it may not do much. There are some games where it's going to be pretty good though, but I wouldn't go higher than a C for Monastery Swift Spear. Next time, now card is one of the best cards in the set. It's Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker, 3 red for a 4 loyalty planeswalker. +1, it becomes a 4/4 red dragon with flying, indestructible, and haste. So that's just fantastic. It's immediately it's like a 4/4 flyer haste, which adds loyalty. The only downside is that it's fragile to like getting attacked during your opponent's turn. But your opponent also can't use a removal spell, because back in these days, removal spells didn't hit planeswalkers. -3, it is 4 damage to target creature, so if you need to kill a flyer, you can do that. You can play this, maybe you don't even want to attack, you can kill something that would threaten Sarkhan. -6 is you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your draw step, draw 2 additional cards. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. So at that stage of the game, you're gonna have used most of the cards in your hand, so it's basically just an upside. The fact that you have to discard your hand doesn't matter too much. So it's a pretty sweet thing to have, but honestly, if you just plus Sarkhan, you're gonna kill your opponent so fast that you don't even need the ultimate. It's nice to have the ultimate. Let's say you plus Sarkhan a couple of times, then your opponent plays a big reach creature. Now you can cash it in and make sure you're winning the end game. Of course, you could get decked still, but you're probably gonna win. So A for Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker. The only reason I'm not giving it an A+ is that there are some white boards your opponent can have where it may not do much. It will come down, kill a creature, and then get killed. So this is not as good as Wingmate Rock, but it's still a fantastic card. A. Shatter, speaking of a card that doesn't have a home. 1 red for an instant, you destroy an artifact. Again, another sideboard card at sideboard D-. If your opponent's got a Ghost Fire Blade, this is one of the better equipments. This is a card that's not even a good sideboard card against that, because what if you draw this and your opponent doesn't draw the Ghost Fire Blade? So I would give this an F, but maybe sideboard D-. Summit Prowler, we have a vanilla creature here. 2 red for a 4/3, and that's it. Does give you Ferocious, which is nice, but double red is annoying in a 3-colored format. If I'm Teamer, my mana is pretty good, I have Ferocious, I'm gonna play this about a C level, but I'm not too excited about it. I would look to wheel this card. The art is very good though. But yeah, double red hurts you pretty bad in a 3-color format. Swift Kick, 3 red for instant. Target creature you can target +1/+0 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. This is a really bad version of the green ones that bite. This is a fight, not a bite, which makes it a lot worse. I would give this a D-. I would have to be incredibly desperate for a removal before I play this, but because +1/+0 and fight is just not good. You're not adding anything. The main use is to pick off a small evasive or utility creature, but it's also 4 mana, so it's very expensive. Tormenting Voice, 1 red for sorcery. As an additional cost of cast it, you discard a card and you draw 2 cards. So this is mainly to trigger prowess, and maybe in team where you have some delve cards. This fills up your graveyard with 2 cards. One is the card you discard, and one is the Tormenting Voice. It's mostly filler. It's about a D+, C-. But if I have delve or I'm heavy on prowess, because this gives you a prowess trigger and digs you towards your prowess cards, but at the end of the day you can't really play too many cards that dirtle around like this. Trumpet Boss, another go wide card, 2 red for an instant. Attacking creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So mostly an F, but every once in a while you can have like a Mardu deck that creates a bunch of tokens. You may want this. I prefer Rush of Battle, honestly, because The fact that it's a sorcery doesn't matter that much, and that gives you a bunch of life to play with. So around a D, I want to say, but mostly an F. Valley Dasher, 1 red for a 2/2 with haste, and it attacks each turn if able. Very aggressive card, and it can come down and attack pretty nicely, and the fact that people are playing morphs means that if your opponent trades a morph for this, you're pretty happy. But I would only play this card in a super aggressive deck, and there it could be like a C, I think. Or name Aspirant, 1 red for a 2/1. Raid, it comes into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, and it can't be blocked by creature power 1 or less. Yeah, that means that double blocking this is harder with like 2/1/1s. And there are also some, we have seen some 0/5s and 0/6s, and this can't block that. Really solid card, becomes much better when you're on the play. I think it's about a C+ if you're aggressive. It's just not that good if you can't raid it, of course. Alright, green, so we have Temur, Sultai, and Abzan, and neither of these tricolor are particularly aggressive. I think Temur is the most aggressive of them. Abzan is mid-range, and Sultai is pretty controlling. So I wouldn't look to play the most aggressive cards here. Alpine Grizzly, so this card I like way more than the Summit probably for Ferocious. It's 2 and a green for a 4/2, and that's it. But it's only 1 pip, 1 green, and it costs 1 mana less. Yes, it has less toughness, dies to like the black debilitating injury. But in a Temur deck, I think this is sort of like a role player. You can play a bunch of these and a barrage of boulders. And it also gives you all the other ferocious stuff. So I think in a Temur deck, this might be around a C. And in other decks, it's like a D+ something. Archer's Parapet, 1 and a green for a 0/5 defender, 1 and a black, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is mostly a Sultai card and an Abzan card, and that are defensive. So if I'm defensive, I think it's a pretty decent card because it blocks almost everything early, and then late game it starts picking away. It's not a fantastic card, but I remember being pretty surprised by this card. And sometimes when you played against this card, you felt like this almost felt like a little bit of a win condition because it blocks everything, and then at the end of the game it starts picking away. So I think it's a C in those decks. It's not a great card, but I was a little positively surprised by this card. Awaken the Bear, this is a card that's pretty good with Ferocious. 2 and a green for an instant, target creature get +3/+3 against trample until your turn. Plays very nicely in Temur because of your large power, and in the controlling, like Abzan or Salt, I wouldn't play this card. But in Temur, I think this is a C+. It's basically what you want. You win a combat, you get through for a lot of damage. And Awaken the Bear, barrage of boulders, and a bunch of 4-power creatures. That's a deck. Come Immense, 5 and a green for a Delve card. Instant, target creature get +6/+6 until end of turn. So this is kind of Delve card I don't like too much in these Delve decks because this is not the kind of effect you want. So this is more like a card I can play in Temur if I got no other Delve or a very little Delve. Maybe I have like one other Delve card. Because if I'm not using my graveyard for Delve, this is almost like a free card. Like it's very cheap, and I mean it has a lot of potential in Temur. Like if you combine this card plus Awaken the Bear, that's 9 trample. And you can also combine this card with Barrage of Boulders. You can even cast Barrage of Boulders first, get a card into your graveyard. So in a Temur deck, without much other Delve and with some trampled cards or Barrage of Boulders, it's about a C+. But I think that mostly it's like a D+ in the other decks. I just don't think I want this effect in Abzan or in Temur. I should say Sultai, even though it has Delve. So you would think it's a Sultai card, but I think it's more like secretly a Temur card. Dragon Scale Boon. 3 and a green for an instant. You put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature and untap it. So this has a lot of applications in Temur and Abzan. In Temur, it helps you get Ferocious, win a combat. Works nice if you got some Trampler. And in Abzan, it gives you the bonuses from the +1/+1 counter stuff, like the Lifelinker or the Flyer. You can even use it pre-combat to give something flying if you got the Abzan Falconer. Mostly, it's a fine card. I think it's about a C. It can also just randomly eat something and become bigger, but it is expensive, it's telegraphed, it is bad to instant speed of interaction, so I would give it a C. Feed a clan, 1 green for an instant, you gain 5 life, and ferocious, you gain 10 life. Pretty bad, and I would give this an F. If you're playing against some Jeskai deck that wants to burn you out with Arrow Storm, sure, you can cite it in around the D+. The problem is, of course, that maybe your opponent is just attacking you with creatures, doesn't even is on the Arrow Store plan because they just drew all creatures. You just drew a blank that doesn't do anything. It buys you some time, but you're down a card, and it didn't solve the problem of you getting attacked by a lot of creatures. So I would mostly give this an F. F for Feed a Clan. Hardened Scales, green for an enchantment, and if you would put one or more +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. So it's an Absan card, but mostly as an F. You're not going to end up with enough counters, and it's also a little bit of a win more. If you're in a position to put a bunch of counters on your creatures, this will make it you rich getting richer. So I would mostly give Hardened Scale an F. But every once in a blue moon, you may have an Absan deck with like 11 or 12 ways to put counters on your things, and it's gonna perform pretty well then. But even then, it's a little bit of a win more. So save Hardened Scales for constructive. Heir of the Wilds, 1 green for a 2/2 with Death Touch. So already we're looking at a solid card. What grade would I give a 2/2 Death Toucher for 2? About a C+, I think. It's just nice early, nice late. But it also has ferocious. When you attack with a creature with power 4 or greater, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And that could include this itself. So if you pump this up +2/+2, it will become a 5/5. Yeah, really rock solid card. I would give it a B-. I think that in fact it's good early, good late, and gives even more buffed later on in Teamer. So B- for Heir of the Wilds. I'm just super happy with this card. It just performs so well. It's not even that bad of a top deck, and that's about as good as you can say for a 2-drop. So we have another 2-drop, Highland Game, 1 green for 2/1, and when it dies you gain 2 life. So the idea is here that you play this early and you can attack or block morphs. The problem, of course, is that this will eventually get outclassed, and the 2 life I don't think makes up for it. It is nice as late game you can jump and gain 2, but that's still the recipe for winning limited games is not to jump if you have to. So I think it's a D+. It's a card you can throw into your deck as a 23rd card. And if your deck is lacking early game, it is pretty nice that you can play this early and then late game you can get some value from it. Maybe it gets a little better if you got Delve. You can jump, gain some life, and buy time. Put a card in your graveyard for Delve. Mostly filler. Hooded Hydra, X green for a 0/0 creature, and of course it comes into play with X +1/+1 counters on it. And when it dies, you put a 1/1 green snake creature token into play for each counter on it. And it has more free green, and if you turn face up, you put 5 counters on it. So this is a card that's good to play and good to morph. It's never bad. If you play it as a morph, you can even get the surprise value by playing it as a 5/5 and then block a 5/5, get 5 1/1s. And if you cast this for free, it's a pretty solid card. Like 5 mana for a 3/3 that dies into 3 1/1s. It's just a good limited card. I would give this card a B+. I think it's a solid card. It is a little slow, and sometimes the 1/1s won't do that much, but it's a very good card. I mean, it does a lot of things. It's not great when you get beaten down by flyers or someone's barrage of bouldering you. That even kills the 1/1. But it's a good card. B+, doesn't get to A level though. Hooting Mandrills, 5 green for a 4/4. It has Delve and Trample. This is mostly a Teamer card. Gives you Ferocious, because Teamer doesn't have that many cards with Delve, so you may have this almost like a free roll. I think it's a C+ in Teamer. It just does what you want. It gives you a graveyard payoff. It gives you a 4-power creature. It even has Trample, so it works fantastic with like Becoming Men's, for example. So C+, and in Salta is also decent, because if you can like Delve a bunch, or you can put a bunch of cards in your grave, or being able to double spell, have a good blocker. So I think it's mostly a C+. It's just a good card. Incremental Growth, this is a swingy card. 3 green for a sorcery. You put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, 2 on another one, and 3 on a third target creature. Here's one thing to think about with this card. You have to put the counters on different creature. So if you only got 2 creatures, you can't cast this card unless you want to put a counter on your opponent's creatures, which may be okay, but if you got one creature, you probably can't cast it. But it can be an insane card and also give you all the bonuses from +1/+1 counters, or it can be clunky and bad if you don't have enough creatures. So I think most is a good card. When you cast this card, oftentimes you have to rank this card about how you feel when your opponent plays it. And when my opponent plays Incremental Growth, I just feel like I want to concede, especially if my opponent is absent. But you will just have to note that this card requires you to have a lot of creatures in your deck, because you really want to have 3 creatures in play when you cast this, because you don't want to pump up your opponent's creatures. Then it's almost like you negated one of the counters. So I think it's a B, but the B is if you have a lot of creatures in your deck and if you got +1/+1 counter synergies. Then it gets to a B. Otherwise, it's probably like a B-. Kin 3 Warden. Pretty mediocre morph here. Green for a 1/1. You can play 2 and regenerate it, and you can morph for a green. Very cheap. So the joke is that you flip this up and regenerate it, so you can block a big creature or maybe even eat a 1 toughness creature. Mostly it doesn't play out that well, but again, it's still a fine card. This is even a warrior, if that matters for a green deck. I don't know. Maybe you're like an Abs and has some warrior things going on. I think it's a C- again. One of the weaker morphs. Just a 1/1 is pretty weak. And you're not going to blow out your opponent on attacks with this card very often. Longshot Squad, 3 and a green for a 3/3. It has Outlast for 1 and a green. And each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has Reach. Weaker than the white bangers, because Reach is much more defensive. And I'm not looking to spend time to make my cards better defensively usually, most of the time. But it's not a terrible card. I would give it a C-. The fact that you have to pay 4 mana for a 3/3 and then spend 2 mana to make a big Reach creature which are inherently defensive makes it less exciting, because you can't block if you outlast this card for 1 turn. So it's a C-, I think. Meandering Tower Shell. This is a very unique card. 3 green for a 5/9 with Island Walk. So if that were everything it would be solid. It would be like a B, I think. Just a huge blocker that is unblockable against white. And 5 mana for a 5/9 is just blocks everything and also attacks pretty well, even if your opponent doesn't have islands. But when it attacks, you exile it, and you return to the battlefield unless you control tapped and attacking at the beginning of the declare attacker step on your next turn. So this is almost like a 2.5/9 for 5. That's unblockable. But if your opponent doesn't have islands, it's not unblockable at that point. Island Walk is a little better in this format because people are playing 3 colors, so you are going to get unblockable against 3 of the guilds, but still. I think this is a C+. What often happens with this card, and you play it and it blocks everything, it's just stonewalls the ground. And then at some point you start attacking for 2.5 damage a turn, essentially. I mean, it's 5 every other turn. So it's solid. I would give it a C+. I wouldn't like slam it and be super happy about it. It's a funny card. Naturalize. So this is slightly better than Erase and Shatter, but still not great. 1 and a green for an instant. Destroy an artifact or enchantment. So it's a Cyborg C-. It's a card you can... If you see like your opponent has got a Ghostfire Blade and maybe Trail of Mystery, sure. But otherwise, probably not. Next, we have a good morph though. Pine Walker. 3 green for a 5/5. So you could hardcast this and not be too sad. But it has more 4 and a green. And when it or another creature you control its turn fires up, you untap it. So you can ambush with this card. You can even attack with this as a morph. You don't even flip it up. And then during your opponent's turn, you flip it up and ambush. The thing you often do though with this card is you attack, your opponent doesn't block. You flip this up and then it almost had vigilance. All in all, we're talking about a C+ here. The dream of this card doesn't happen that often, ambushing and getting like going off with some other morph that has some tap ability. But it's solid. I will give it a C+. And it's also a card you can just don't be afraid to just hardcast this on turn 5. Don't think that you're gonna ambush every game, but it's a solid card, C+. Next card is also great, Radical Mystic, 1 and green for a 2/1. It taps to add green, blue, or red to your mana pool. And it has morph 2. And when it turns face up, you add green, blue, red to your mana pool. You don't have to be Teamer to play this card, but of course it's the best there. It fixes you. If you're Sultai, it's also decent. And even if I'm Absan and I can't even use the blue and red, I'm still gonna play a 2 that taps for green. That's just a solid card. When you turn face up, you are ahead on mana. The only thing that you had to spend 3 mana to morph it. This is a card I'm actually hard casting more often than I'm morphing. Because if you morph this and face it up, you have spent 5 mana to get back 3. And then of course you can tap it, so you're even, but you had to like spend 3 mana to morph it. I think it's a B minus though, just a very good card. I think it's a B minus in Temur and Sultai and like a C plus in Absent. In Absent it's mostly just a 2 mana 2 taps for green, which is very respectable card. Roar of Challenge, 2 and a green for a sorcery. All creatures able to block target creature this turn do so, and Ferocious, that creature gains indestructible. So this is somewhat similar to Barrage of Boulders in that it can kill your opponent, but one of your creatures can get blocked. So it's a little less good at killing your opponent, but it's a little better at eating creatures. So it's sort of in the middle ground. I honestly think this is worse than Barrage of Boulders in the deck that wants this, because I'd rather just try to kill my opponent than try to eat something. If you got a large Death Touch creature, though, maybe you're like Absan with a Merrick Nightblade, and you level that up, and you attack, you get to kill 3 creatures. But it seems a little weird. Though. So I would mostly give this the same grade as Barrage of Boulders. I think it's a little worse. It does some different things, so I would give it like a C minus. Sagu Archer, 4 and a green for a 2/5. It has reach and it morphs for 4 and a green. So this is pretty good at ambushing flyers, but it's still kind of a clunky card. And 5 mana is a lot. I would give it a C minus. You can board it in against a Jesker deck, I guess. But I wouldn't expect too many things about this. Savage Punch. Look at that art. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control, but Ferocious +2/+2. So at that point, if you have Ferocious, this is a great card. It's obviously not going to be a 2-drop, but most 5-spell aren't 2-drops anyway. In Temur, I would give this a C+, and in like Absan, I would give it a C, and in Salt, I would probably also give it a C, because you can sometimes just get 4-powered creature in those guilds anyway, but it's at its best in Temur. It can lead to some savage punches, savage blowouts. Scout the borders, 2 and a green for a sorcery. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature or land card from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So this doesn't put 5 cards in your graveyard for delve. This card by itself and the 4 cards that you put into your graveyard. It's still just spinning the wheel. I would mostly just play this in Sultai if I have a lot of delve. And also it gets a little better if you got some Bombi creature. And it works pretty nice with Hooting Mandrills, because this also pays for a lot. You can find the Hooting Mandrills and even play it in the same turn. And let's say you play 4 mana for a 4/4. That's not the end of the world. So I would give this a C minus, and in Salt I can maybe play it around a C, I think. CD Unwritten, 4 green for a sorcery. You reveal the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest into your graveyard. And Ferocious, if you have 4, you may put 2 creatures on the battlefield instead of 1. This has a lot of potential. It is a little bit of a win more, because you need a big creature and then you're gonna get even more. It does very little if you don't have Ferocious. Gets better if you got some bombs. And this card could also deck you. But on the flip side, it could help you with delve cards later. I think it's a sweet card. And I would look to play it in Sultai or in Temur mostly. I think it's a build around B-. I think that if you got some bombs, if you got a reasonable amount of 4-powered creature, you can do a lot of work. But I wouldn't just play this in a random deck. I need I have to look at what kind of creatures I'm looking to hit. Because yes, it's a 2-for-1, but what if I hit some random 2-drop or 3-drop? And it is nice though that if you got some morphs, they will be flipped up immediately. So we'll get to a good morphs in a second here. Seek the Horizon, 3 and a green for a sorcery. You search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them and put them into your hand. So they don't go into the library. I think this is an F. I just think that these cards are not even that good when you put in the cards on the battlefield. And this one even puts them into your hand, so it doesn't ramp you. It only fixes you. And yes, you are getting 3 cards only for spending 1, but you're playing 4, you're not affecting the board, you're not ramping. So I would give this an F and stay away from it. Smoke Teller, 1 green for a 2/2, and whenever you look at target face down creature. I remember this card not being that good because the ability is nice, but there are times when you look at your opponent's morphs and there's nothing you can do about it. You look at that they have a big creature you're gonna flip up, and yes, it may improve your blocks somewhat, but a lot of the times when you look at your opponent's morphs, okay, and what am I gonna do about it? But it still is a 2/2 for 2, so it's not terrible. I just don't expect too much from the abilities. I think it's a C minus though. It's not terrible, but and I think it's a little better than Highland Game on average. Sultai Flayer, 3 green for 3/4, and whatever creature you control with toughness 4 or greater dice, you gain 4 life. So that includes this card. I think this is a solid card. 4 mana for 3/4 that dies, you gain 4 life is solid. And it may even give you some other triggers. There are some matchups where it's going to be sick. You play against like a Martyr deck that has mostly spells that kill small creatures. It's going to sit into play and make it almost impossible for your opponent to win. I think it's a C+. It's a solid card. Teamer Charger, 1 green for a 3/1. So if you want that, you can have it, but it doesn't give you Ferocious. Morph, you reveal a green card, and with turn face up target creature, you gain Trample until the end of turn. Which is okay. That's a ability that's nice in the late game. It's not gonna do very much early in the game though. I think it's mostly a C. It's not a terrible card, and it gets a little better in like a teamer deck that has some large tramplers, but you may not even have that big of a use for that ability. Trail of Mystery. Now here's a sweet build, right? 1 green for an enchantment. Whenever a face-down creature enters the battlefield under your control, so that's morphs in this set, I think mostly, you may search your library for basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So the first couple of times you play a morph, you're gonna feel like you're getting away with something. There's gonna be a point where it doesn't matter that you get a land. But the land also means that you can play some off-color morphs, because this card will find you the basic land that you need to flip up the morph. And then, whenever a permanent you control is turn face up, if it's a creature, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So that makes it a nightmare for your opponent to attack into your creatures, or if you are attacking. This is clearly a build around. If I got like 10 morphs, I would think this is about a B. If I got like 5 morphs, I may not even play it, but it is a very sweet card. It helps you. It is an engine for like a 4 or 5 color morph deck, because it fixes your mana. It means your opponent's gonna have a super hard time attacking you. And the nice thing also is that the threat of activation means that you don't even have to flip up the morphs that you want. You can just save them and then do it at the perfect time. So build around B. If I got 7 morphs, I will play it. Tusked Colosson, 4 green for a 6/5 vanilla. So this suffers a lot from a card we're gonna see in a second here. It doesn't have morph. It only is a big creature, which means that I'm gonna give this card a D-. I just think I'd much rather play a morph, because a morph I can use hard cast for 6 if I draw it late, or I can play it for 3 mana early. So this is a victim of this being a morph set. Yes, it gives you Ferocious, but pretty mediocre card. Next card is not mediocre though, it's Tuskguard Captain, 2 green for a 2/3. It has Outlast for a green, and a creature you control with a +1/+1 on has Trample. So very cheap morph cost. This is a looming ticking time bomb. You play it early and then you start outlasting it, and then this plus some other stuff's gonna have Trample and it's gonna make for a good combat. I would give it a B-. I think it's a rock solid card. Also, if you play this, level it up, you have a 3/4 that also blocks pretty well, so it's not that terrible on defense. Especially coming down as a 2/3 for 3, blocks all morphs for a while as well. Windstorm, X and a green for an instant. You deal X damage to each creature with flying. Both your sideboard card is not even that good of a one. If I see a Jeskai deck with a ton of flyers, I may board it in about a C level, but it's mostly an F. Next card is a sweet card. It's Woolly Loxodon, King of the Morphs. 5 green for a 6/7. So 7 mana 6/7, not great, but it has morph for 5 and a green. And this beats all other morphs, that's why it's called King of the Morphs. And it's good. This is the kind of card that if you're playing against green and they reach 6 mana, you should suspect this card. And it's very hard to get blocked. I would give this card a C+. This card just performed very well. And I would play this card in all my green guilds, which is saying a lot. I would play this card in Sultai. because it gives me something early I can trade off, fuel my Dell, and then in the late game it just dominates the board. Alright, getting to the gold cards now. Abomination of Gudul. 3 salt die for a 3/4 flyer. And with this common touch player you may draw a card if you discard a card. And it has more for 2 black, green, blue. So the idea is that this is a card you morph up pre-combat, attack, and negative loot. I think it's okay. I was never too impressed by this card. It was a little clunky. The idea is that it loots and gives you delve fodder, but it is slow. But it's a morph, so it's not bad. I would give it a C. Insult, of course. All these cards are only playable in one. Maybe you can splash them sometimes if you got some random duel. Absent Ascendancy. White, black, green for an enchantment. When it ends the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And so this is a card you want to play when you got a white board. It doesn't do much early. It will still do something, because if you play it early, you will get a 1/1 flyer every time a creature you control dies. But ideally, you put a wide board first, so you get to pump it up. I think it's a very powerful card. I would give it a B+, and I would probably splash for it in like an assault deck if I have a lot of creatures, which may not be the case, of course. But it's a B+, and make sure you have a lot of creatures. And if you got +1/+1 counter synergies, even better. Absent Shom, this was a constructed staple. White, black, green for an instant. You choose one. You exile target creature power 3 or greater. You draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. And you distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among one or two target creatures. I mostly use this first and the last ability. I remember drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life when you got so many better options. Didn't happen that often. But the first ability is just rock solid. You get rid of a big creature. You can even do it instant speed against a morph when it's flipped up. Or you win combats. Sometimes, I think at the previous, I did win 2 combats with this card, and then the game was just over. I would give it a B. It's just a fantastic card, very versatile. But I would almost never draw cards with this. But you can do that if you're like, I don't know what. If you're desperate, you probably want to kill a big creature, though. Absent Guide. 3 and Absent for a 4/4 with lifelink, and it does more for 5. So this one I liked more than the Gudul, because it just gives you a good life swing. This could be a game plan by itself with like a Fatal Resistance. I would give it a C+, and this is a card that would pull me a little bit into Absent. Because lifelink is just such a swing ability, and if you can protect this card or get clear attacks in, you can just win the game against some of the more aggressive guilds. And Offense of the Foremost, another Absent card. White, black, green for a 4/4, so already we are ahead of the curve, but it's hard to cast. But when it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target tapped creature you control, so that's an attacking creature mostly. And if a creature card would put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So that hoses Delve pretty hard. It also hoses creatures with some die trigger. Fantastic card, the only problem is the mana. If I'm Absent, I would pick, this is about an A-, just because it does so much. It's a overcosted, it's an undercosted creature that pumps your other stuff and hoses the graveyard. So A-. This is a card that's a little trickier to splash though, just because if you're splashing this card and it comes down a little later, it may not do the thing, but on turn 3 this is almost unbeatable. Ankle Shankler, I remember this being controversial card. 2 red, white, black for a 2/2 with haste, and when it attacks creature you control gains first strike and death touch until end of turn. So that means that your creatures are essentially invulnerable, and if your opponent wants to block them, unless your opponent's got first strike creatures, then they get to trade, otherwise your opponent's creature just dies. The problem is that it's a 2/2 for 5. So it's a little bit of a win more card, but it does help you win some tricky combats. I would give this a C+ in an aggressive murder deck, which is maybe surprisingly low, but I never was too high on it because 2 toughness is just so fragile. Does to the debilitating injury, does to every move as below under the sun, basically. And if you're behind, it does absolutely nothing. It's just a 2/2 for 5. Armament Corps, this is another insane card. 2 white, black, green for a 4/4. And when it ends the battlefield, distribute 2 +1/+1 counter among 1 or 2 target creatures. So how do you like a 5-mana 6/6? Because that's the worst case. The best case is to get the 2 counters with haste. You pick up a any +1/+1 synergies. I would give this card a B+. If I see this card first pick, I'm probably gonna take it. I think it's a fantastic card and a very good reason to be Absent. Is also even a splashable card, but like a 5-mana 6/6 is not a bad place to start. And especially when 5-mana 6s that also picks up like lifelink or flying or first strike. Avalanche Tusker, 2 green, blue, red, so we have a teamer card, 6/4. When it attacks target creature of any controller blocks it is combat if able. This is not that good of a card, honestly. It's a 5-mana 6/4 that you can force something to block it, but your opponent probably looking to block this card anyway. It's not a bad card, it gives you ferocious, which it should. I would give it a C+. It's nothing special, honestly. It could almost, this almost could be a common, honestly. 5-mana 6/4 has to be blocked when it attacks. That could be a common. Next teamer card is much better. It's Bear's Companion, 2 green, blue, red for a 2/2. When it enters the battle, you get a 4/4 bear. So you have 5 mana for 6's worth of stats spread over 2 bodies. If you can blink this, it's sick. If you can sometimes even bounce this card and play it again. But 5 mana for 6 mana worth of stats is nice. One of them gives you ferocious as well. I will give it a B. B for Bear's Companion. Butcher of the Horde, 1 red, white, black for a 5/4 flyer. You can sacrifice another creature and give it Vigilance, Lifelink, or Haste. So you can even get a hit in the turn you play if you want to. Then you can make it impossible for your opponent to raise to give it Lifelink. I almost never gave this Vigilance. I think Lifelink is just a better way. Because Vigilance means that you want to stop your opponent from attacking you. But if you gain 5 life, it's almost the same. So, but it's a fantastic card. I'll give it an A-. It may sometimes not be that good if you don't have too many other creatures, but because it's a hard to cast 4-mana 5/4 flyer, which is great, but it's a little hard to cast. But I will give it an A- though. Next we have Chief of the Edge, white black for a 3/2. So we're already ahead here. And other warriors, your creatures you control get +1/+0. Fantastic card, and this is a reason to go into the black-white warrior deck. It's a great card in Mardu too, a little less so in Absent. But I would give it a B-. Chief of the Scale is white-black for a 2/3, and other warrior creatures you control get +0/+1. So this one is a little more defensive, but it's still great. And it's not a bad aggressive card either. I would also give it a B-. These cards are reasons to draft white-black. Because while they are good in Mardu and decent in Absent, in a straight-up white-black warrior deck, you're gonna have a much easier time casting this on turn 2. So it's mostly the mana, I think, that makes these cards so good in white-black warriors. Crackling Doom, Mardu, red, white, black for an instant. It deals 2 damage to each opponent. Each opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures he or she controls. So this is basically a Doomblade that gets around hexproof. So it's very good against one of the cards we're going to see later, a Sultai hexproof card. And you also get to deal your opponent 2. I don't think this card is like a bomb, but it's a B-. It's a hard to cast Doomblade, but if I'm in Mardu, I'm gonna pick it around a B-, I think. Or even B, maybe. But it's not like a bomb, because at the end of the day, it's a 1/1 that is a little bit of damage. And also, if your opponent's got 2 creatures with the same power, your opponent gets to choose, which can be a little awkward. And also, what if your opponent's best creature has lesser power? It's some utility creature. Yeah, still a great card, but I wouldn't like... I would probably first pick it, but I wouldn't like... I would probably pick like a... If this was in the same pack as Armament Corps, I'm taking Armament Corps, by the way. Death Frenzy, now this is an interesting card. 3 black-green for a sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, you gain 1 life. So it's an infest that also gives a little bit of life. And puts a card in your graveyard for Delve. And if you kill some of your own creatures, they also go to the graveyard. It is expensive though. I would give this like a build around C+. In a Sultai deck that's controlling, it could be okay. And I can also see it starting in my sideboard, and I can bring it in against the Mardu deck, for example. It's not that good against Jeska because they don't have that many creatures, but it's an interesting card though. Deflecting Poem, red-white for an instant. The next time a source of your choice will deal damage you this turn, prevent that damage. If damage is prevented this way, Deflecting Poem deals that much damage to that source's controller. I think this card is bad because it's basically a drain spell, life drain spell. That's also situational. Yes, if your opponent attacks you with a super large creature, you can get a big blowout, but We're talking about a red-white card that needs your opponent to attack you for this to do anything. And also, it doesn't deal any damage to creatures. So I would give this card a D-. Maybe if I'm like some weird Jeskai burn deck that think that my opponent's gonna attack me with some large creatures, it could be good. But I would mostly stay away from this card. Next card though is one of the best cards in the set, Dune Blast. 4 white, black, green. Sorcery. Choose up to 1 creature, destroy the rest. So you don't even have to slow roll your best creatures before this Wrath. You can just play your best creature and keep that. And it kills everything else. So you're ahead on board. Sometimes you can even attack with the creature and kill your opponent. But anyway, I will give this card an A. I don't think it gets to A+ because 7 mana is still a lot. You may die sometimes before you cast it. And if I have this card, I may pick up some of the ramp artifacts. I generally don't like this card, but I'm looking to play a 7-drop that usually wins the game. I think you can afford to play one of those ramp artifacts. A Fifth Weapon Master, 3 blue, red, white for a 4/3 first strike. And when it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control get +3/+0 until end of turn, and it morphs for 5. I remember this card being pretty solid. A 4/3 first strike beats most things in combat. You flip it up and you can even eat like a 4/4. You can even give something else plus and do some nice things. I think this is one of the better morphs. I would give it a C+. Flying Crane Technique. 3 blue, red, white for an instant. Untap all creatures you control, they gain flying and double strike until end of turn. So this is like a barrage of boulders on steroids, but it's much harder to cast. And it has some application in untapping your creatures and ambushing, but you mostly want to cast this to kill your opponent. I was never a huge believer in this card. I think it asks a little too much of you, and the fact that it costs 6 mana is also annoying. I would give it like a build around C. I think that if you're a Jeskai deck who just want some way to finish the game, and you got a good amount of creatures, yeah, sure, but I think it's a little too expensive and situational, and I'd probably just rather have Barrage of Boulders. That's a card I can use to like kill small things as well. High Spire Mantis, 2 red, white for a 3/3 flying trample. Solid card, comes down, is evasive. Trample is a little weird on a flyer, but still, your opponent may want to block with a 1/1 and then they still take 2. I will give it a C+. I just think that a red-white Mardu deck is going to be happy with this card. Have an evasive card that can peck away while your opponent is dirtling around is nice. Ice Feather Aven, this card was a beating. Green blue for a 2/2 flyer. So already we're talking a pretty good card in green blue. So we're talking Teamer or Sota. But it has morph 1 green blue and returns face up. You return another target creature to its owner's hand. This gives you like Mistraven vibes. You are having to spend a little more mana, 3/3. But on the flip side, you can just cast this on turn 2 and beat down. And you can also save your own creatures against a removal spell. You can't save this, so there's no loop going on. But if your opponent kills one of your creatures, you may save it. It's also very nice to... Your opponent flips up a big morph, and you flip up your card and bounce the big morph, and your opponent's set back pretty hard. I will give it a B. And it's a B in Teamer, I guess a B- in Sota. Iritus Fortress. Now this is a fortress. 2 white, black, green for a 5/7. And untap each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on during each other plays untap step. So you can outlast as much as you want during your turn, and then you can still untap them. You can't outlast during your opponent's turn, but you can outlast and still have them able to block her. Also, it's a 5/7 for 5. I think this is about a B-. I think that it's a solid card, but it's worse than Armament Corps. It's a solid card that gives you some value, but it doesn't do anything super special though, like the Armament Corps. Jeskai Ascendancy, blue, red, white for an enchantment. When you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can untap them. I actually have to untap them. And when you cast a non-creature spell, you may draw a card if you do a discard card. This is a lot of good things going, because you can... the looting means you're going to find more non-creature spells. Your creature's going to get big. I think most of this card was not that great. You need... For this ability to be good, you need a wide board mostly, and you need a lot of non-creature spell. And it's hard to combine those two. Because if you're only giving one creature +1/+1, that's not that good. So I think Jeskai Ascendancy is a build around C+ in a Jeskai deck that has a lot of token makers. Maybe you have... This card is a card that's very good with Hordeling Outburst though. So if you can get the mana to work, it's a good card with Hordeling Outburst. Maybe even can throw a Goblin Slide in there. Because you need a wide board for this to be super good. Because if you only give him one creature +1/+1, that's not so good. Jeskai Charm. Blue, red, white for an instant. You choose one. You put a creature on top of its own library. You deal 4 damage to a target opponent. And creatures you control get +1/+1 gain lifelink at the end of turn. A very wide range of things here. None of them are like super good, but they are all flexible. I would give Jeskai Charm a C+. I think it's a good card, but it doesn't do anything that insane. It is nice and flexible though. Hero Lich Lord, 3 black, green, blue for a 4/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 and a black. If you do, return a creature card at random from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains flying, trample, and haste, and you exile it at an end step. And I think this is mostly a bad card. It's an expensive 4/4 that gives you some value from your graveyard. Gets a little better if you got some comes into play effects on your card, but the effect here is inherently aggressive. You are getting a card back for a turn and attacking with it. And Salt is not looking to be aggressive, so I would mostly give this card a D and stay away from it. I just don't think that this is what Sultai wants to do. King Tree Invocation, black-green for a sorcery. You put an XX black and green spirit warrior creature token onto the battlefield. X is the greatest toughness among creatures you control. So Dream Curve is the disowned ancestor into this. But then you're still left with the disowned ancestor, which may not do much. I was never a believer in this card. I think it was too situational. And the fact that it's 2 mana, it would be almost better if it was like a 4 mana card that checked the double toughness. Because it's a little waste that it's a 2 mana card. I would give this card a D+, and in some super high toughness card decks, it could go up to like a C+, I suppose. Next card is a beating. It's Mantis Rider. Blue, red, white for a 3/3 flying vigilance haste. If I'm a yes guy, I'm slamming this, of course, and I would look to first pick it. I would give it a B+. It doesn't get higher because it doesn't. It's solid, but it's a little rough to cast even in yes guy. But I would give it a B+ and look to move in. Mardu Ascendancy, red, white, black for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature you control attacks, you put a 1/1 red goblin creature tapped and attacking. So that may not be good that it's tapped and attacking, because your opponent may sometimes be able to eat it. But you can sacrifice this to give creature you control +0/+3 until end of turn. I never liked this card too much. I think it was a little bit too situational. A lot of the times the 1/1 just gets eaten, and this last ability doesn't do that much, because then you're losing this enchantment. I think this card is a D+. Never a huge believer in the card. But someone could disagree, and I wouldn't be shocked. Mardu Charm, red, white, black for an instant. You choose one. It deals 4 damage to target creature. Okay, that looks pretty good. You get 2 1/1 white warrior creatures, and they gain first strike, so not the other creatures. So 1/1 first strikers could like gang block a 2/2 and eat it. And target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it that play discards the card. That's instant speed, which is interesting, so you can do that during the draw step. But this is mostly 3 mana, deal 4 damage to a creature. So I would give this card a C+. I think it's worse than Crackling Doom, because the main mode is to kill a creature, and Crackling Doom does some other value, and also gets around hexproof, and also may sometimes kill something even larger. I mean, it's a solid card, a C+, but 3 mana deal 4 damage. How good is that card? I think it's a B-, and the fact that it's hard to cast is gonna lead me to give this a C+. Mardu Rough Rider, 2 red, white, black for a 5/4. When it attacks, target creature can't block this turn. And the fact that this is beefy means that it's easier for this card to not get eaten. So you're gonna hit the biggest creature. I think this is another C+. The problem with this card is a little too expensive. It does good things when it comes down. It's just that Mardu is not looking to play that many 5-drops. So I'm gonna give it a C+, and I would probably look to wheel it if I could, because I don't think too many decks want to play it. No one's gonna want to splash for that card, you know. Master Way is a great card. 3 blue, red for a sorcery. You draw a card, and it deals damage to target creature or play equal to the number of cards in your hand. So assuming you haven't played out too many of your cards, it's gonna deal like 3-4 damage, because you are adding 1 to that. Something can deal 5. It can kill your opponent sometimes, which matters. And later in the game, you could start stockpiling lands you don't need. And it is inherently a 2-for-1. I'm gonna give it a B. And I'm super happy about it both in Temur and in Jeskai. Might be a little better in Jeskai, honestly, because it also triggers prowess, but 2 for 1s are nice, and I'm gonna give it a B. Mind Swipe, X blue red for an instant. You can't target spell unless its controller spends X, and it is X damage to that spell's controller. So you can also kill your opponent with this sometimes, and you can overpay X. You can, like, if you have 8 mana, you can just sink it all in, even if your opponent doesn't have that much mana. At the end of the day, it's a counter spell and a burn spell in the same package, which is usually not the best combination. I'm gonna give it a C+ in like the Jeskai burn deck, maybe. But the problem is that it's not a good counter spell early. And later in the game, it's the burn spell mode comes into play, but sometimes your opponent's not gonna cooperate. Narset Enlightened Master, Fleet blue white for a 3/2 with first strike and hexproof. And when it attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until the end of turn, you may cast non-creature cards exiled with this without paying its mana cost. This is a sweet card, and it has some build around potential. The only problem is that if you're filling your deck bunch with non-creature spells, are you looking to play a 6 mana 3/2? Maybe, maybe not. It can do some sweet stuff, but also 3/2 first strike hexproof by turn 6. Probably gonna get blocked by something. And then it helps that you find something, but there are sometimes you're gonna whiff, you're gonna hit a creature and 3 land. So, sweet card. I will give it a build around C+ in a dedicated Jeskai deck that has a lot of non-creature spell and is looking for a finisher, maybe. It feels a little out of place, though. Ponyback Brigade, 3 red, white, black for a 2/2, but when it enters the battlefield or its turn face up, you put 3/1/1 goblin onto the battlefield, and it has more for 5. Very good go wide card, works perfectly with like the trumpet, brass, rush of battles. This is a warrior, the goblins isn't, but the creature still gets bonus. So it's good with spoils, raider spoils too, because yes, this is the only one card that's gonna draw you cards, but the other cards goblins will be 2/1s. So C+ in a murder deck, I'm pretty happy about it. I'm mostly looking to play this and morph it up. And it's pretty nice. If you play this card, your opponent kills it. You respond by flipping it up, and you almost feel like you got 2 for 1, because your opponent wasted a removal spell and you got 3/1/1s. Rakshasa Death Dealer, black-green for a 2/2. Black-green you can pay to give it +2/+2, or you can play black-green and regenerate it. So it's a very threatening card. The biggest downside is that it dies to the black debilitating anger, but that's not a good argument. It's a good card, though. I would give it a B+. It's the problem with this card is that if you're playing it in Salta, you're gonna have some blue swords, so it's gonna be hard to like double pump it. But it's a solid card, B+ though. Just don't expect it to perform at an A level. Rakshasa Vizier, 2 black, green, blue for a 4/4. Whenever one or more cards are put into exile from your graveyard, put that many +1/+1 counters on Rakshasa Vizier. So that works with Delve, of course, or if you got some reanimate card. Not a great card though. It comes down, it's gonna take a while for it to grow, and your opponent's gonna have a turn window to kill it. So I'm looking at this card as mostly a C in a Sultai deck. It's a big creature that you can sometimes run away with the game, like play a Treasure Cruise, and this becomes an 11/11. But so it has some dreams going on for it, but it's not that great. Ride Down, red white for an instant. Destroy target blocking creatures. Creatures that were blocked by that creature can trample until end of turn. So it's basically like you kill a blocking creature and your creature became unblockable almost. It's solid in Mardu, I think. And in Jeskai, I would give it a C+. It's nothing special though, and it obviously does nothing when you're behind. But you're not looking to be behind that much in those decks. But it is a little situational though. Sage of the Inward Eye, 2 blue, red, white for a 3/4 with flying, and when you cast a non-creature spell, creature you control gain lifelink at the end of turn. Now this is a much better card than Narset because it's a 3/4 fly for 5 to start with. And when you cast a non-creature spell, this is going to give you 3 life plus everything else. So I will give it an A-. Saga Mauler, 4 blue-green for a 6/6. Trample hexproof, and you can morph it up for 5. And if you morph it up, your opponent has no way to respond, because you can't respond to morphs in that way. So it's too late. So you can even flip it up in Stormspur removal spell, because it's not like Ward. Because Ward is a trigger, so if you're flipping up a Ward card, like you activate Fall of the Storm Giants in response to removals, but it doesn't work. But this works because it's face up, has hexproof, can't be targeted. I think this card is an A-. It's just a perfect card for both Sultai and Temur. It's not that terrible to just hard cast it. When you play this card, you're gonna have Ferocious for the rest of the game. And it just savagely blows out any combat when it gets flipped up. 6/6 just beats almost everything in combat. So I would give it an A-. Savage Knuckleblade. Green, blue, red for a 4/4. 2 and a green, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. But you can only do it once. 2 and a blue, you return it to its own hand. And red, it gains haste. This card is fine. It's plays out a little worse than it looks because the abilities are expensive. 3 mana to bounce it is expensive. Giving it haste means you need double red that turn. And the pump is nice. I would give it a B though in Temur. And I would not look to splash for this card. But it does good things, and on turn 3 it's a beating, but it's mostly the first ability that is making it a B. The pump ability is nice. The returning and haste is a little weird, but yeah, it can come up sometimes. Secret Plans, we have a sweet build around here. Green, blue for enchantment. Face down creatures you control get +0/+1. So every morph you play is a 2/3. And whenever a permanent you control is turn face up, you draw a card. Just remember that it will lose to +1/+1 at that point. But most of the morphs become big when you flip them up, so that's not a huge deal. So if you're drawing 2 cards of this, you're in the money. I don't think drawing 1 card is enough. But it's a very annoying card to play against because bumping up all your morphs is annoying, and then you're gonna draw some extra card. I would give it a build around B. And honestly, I almost remember liking this card more than Trail of Mystery because I'm drawing real cards instead of basic lands, which in the late game is much more preferable. And it's just sweet. Sidisi Brood Tyrant, 1 black, green, blue for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, so that fuels Del. And whenever one or more creature card are put into your graveyard from your library, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield. So you're gonna get a 2/2 most of the time you play. You can be unlucky and not hit a land, but that's not that likely. And then it attacks. It may only get 1 attack, but at that point you have milled 6 cards. You have gotten 2 zombies, so your delve is gonna be on. I will give this card a B+. And if I see it first pick, I'm gonna take it and build a sweet Temur Sultai. Siege Rhino. Oh, Siege Rhino. 1 black, white, black, green for a 4/5 trample. When it ends the battlefield, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Insane card. It's understated. It has trample. It drains you, so it's very hard to raise. I would give it an A. Doesn't get the A+ because it's still sometimes it's worse than like Wingmate Rock, but it's a fantastic card. I think you all know that. Snowhorn Rider, 3 green, blue, red for a 5/5 trample that has more for 5. Solid. 5 mana, flip it up and make it a 5/5 win. So amount of combats is like wins over the Glacial Stalker, the 4/5. Trample is nice, gives you Ferocious is nice. I will give it a C+. It's just a card that just you're gonna win some amount of games by just flipping this up and going to town. Can't be shunned in a good way either. Sorin Solemn Vista, 2 white black for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, +1 until your next turn, creature you control get +1/+0 and gain lifelink. So that's your opponent's turn too. But that just wins a lot of races. And -2 you get a 2/2 black vampire, which you can then +1 to give it invasive lifelink, which is very nice. And -6 is you get an emblem with at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep that plays sacrifices a creature. And that's not impossible to do because the +1 means that you're gonna survive. You may not be able to protect Sorin with the ability, but it's gonna make your opponent go after it and then you're gonna make it for life. And if you can get the ultimate, you're gonna win. So I would give Sorin an A. Sultai Ascendancy, black, green, blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put any number of them into your grave and the rest back on the top of your library. So the first time I saw this card, I thought it could be good with Delves, but this card ended up being very bad because you're spending a card on this card and you're only gonna get selection. Yes, it's gonna fuel Delve, but it's also very hard to cast. I remember at the pre-release, my opponent cast this on turn 3 and I thought, uh-oh, I'm gonna lose. But I won that game pretty easily because this card doesn't do anything. So I'm gonna give this card an F and I would stay away from it. Sultai Charm. Black, green, blue for an instant. Choose one to destroy target monocolored creature, which is not morphs, I don't think. You can destroy an artifact or enchantment, or you can draw 2 cards and discard a card. This is mostly the first mode. Last mode doesn't even put you up cards like the Absence Charm. I will give it another C+, I think. Sultai Soothsayer, 2 black, green, blue for a 2/5. And it's bad for you. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put them on in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Sweet card. You're 2 for 1-ing, you're fueling Delve. Nothing not to like here. It's like a perfect Sultai card. I will give it a B-. And 2/5 is a very good blocker, which is what Sultai is looking to do. Especially when you're getting a 2 for 1. Surak Dragonclaw, 2 green, blue, red for a 6/6 flash, and it can't be countered. Creature spells you control can't be countered, and all the creatures you control are trampled. Fantastic card. I mean, this card will eat something if it comes down. Because the 6/6, no questions asked. Your opponent can't counter it, which is not that huge of a deal. But the last ability is nice, giving all your other creatures trample is sweet. I will give it a B+. Yeah, I don't think it gets more than that, but I think it's a B+. Team Ascendancy, green, blue, red for an enchantment. Creature you control have haste. Okay. And every creature with power 4 or greater ends value on your control, you may draw a card. I don't like this card too much either. The problem is that you need 2 creatures to come into play and draw you 2 cards for this to be happy. Because a 3-mana enchantment giving your creatures haste is not good. All in all, it's not a terrible card. I would give it like a build around C in a teamer deck. The problem is that it's hard to cast as well, and taking a turn off to play this card sort of takes away some of the advantage of giving your creatures haste. So I'm not too high on C. Teamer Charm is better though. Green, blue, red for an instant. Target creature you control +1/+1 until end of turn. It fights target creature you don't control. So this is sort of similar like the green common. Counter target spell and controllers pays 3. That's nice to have in the late game. Creature with power 3 or less can't block this turn, which is somewhat good, but yeah, I think this is a B-. It's one of the better charms, but because all of the abilities are this is a charm that has a lot of different abilities, that does things in different things, and they're not all, it doesn't have a huge gap in power level, so I think it's a B-. Trap Essence, this is a card I didn't like. Green, blue, red for an instant. You counter a creature spell and put 2 counters on a creature. It's an Essence card that is super hard to cast, and yes, you get some value, but it's telegraphed, it's clunky. I'll give it a D+. Utter End, 2 white black for an instant. You exile an online permanent. I think this is another C+, B- type card. It's a little better than Charms because it's a little better like the Martyr Charm because it's easier to cast and it can get rid of like a secret plant or something. But I'll give it a B-. It's fine. It's good. It's fine. It's nothing like super amazing. Villainous Wealth. X, black, green, blue for an sorcery. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. You may cast any number of non-land cards with combined mana cost X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. A little too slow, I think. You're gonna hit some amount of lands, which does nothing for you. You may hit some expensive cards you can't cast. You may hit some X spells. All in all, I think it's a pretty bad card. I would give it a D-. It is nice though that you can use it to deck your opponent in the super late game. So maybe it could be a sideboard card against another Sultai deck. And then it could be a sideboard B. You're one of the best cards in your deck. Warden of the Eye. 2 blue, red, white for a 3/3. When it ends the battlefield, you return target non-creature, non-land card from your graveyard to hand. So this is another 2 for 1. Like a mnemonic wall type card. I would give it a B-. I think that it's a perfectly reasonable Jeskai card. Because it gives you back a relevant card that also triggers prowess then. You are overpaying 5 mana for a 3/3, but you're getting a card back, so I think it's a B-. Winterflame, 1 blue, red for an instant. You choose one of both. Tap target creature, and it is 2 damage to target creature. So it kills morphs pretty nicely. This card never did end up being like a super good card. I think it's like about a C+. The problem is that it doesn't always, you can't always use 2 abilities good and later in the game it falls off. Doesn't go phase either. Surgo Helm Smasher. This is like an improved version of the Ankle Shankler. 2 red, white, black for a 7/2 haste. It attacks each combat if able. It has indestructible as long as it's your turn. And whenever a creature deals damage by Surgo Helmsmith this turn dies, it gets a count. So the biggest downside is like again the debilitating injury, but This just comes down, smashes face, your opponent has to chomp it or take 7, can't kill it in combat. Can untap and kill it, which is the biggest downside, but I will give it a B+. Alright, I'm gonna go and take all the banners at the same time. I'm gonna top Absent Banner, 3 mana for an artifact. You tap set white, black, or green, and you can pay 3 mana of the color sack it to draw cards. So the idea is that you pay this and fix your mana early, and later in the game when you don't need it anymore, you get to draw a card. These are almost all bad. I'm gonna give them all a D. But as I said, if you got some super expensive bomb, you can play them because. But 3 mana for a mana rock is just not a good limited card. So I'm gonna give them all Ds. Altered Brood, 1 mana artifact. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So it's like when you play a land, you get a mill. When you play a creature, you get a mill. This is a card that doesn't really have a home in this. There is no real mill deck here, so I'm gonna give it an F. Briber's Purse, X mana for an artifact. It ends the battlefield with X gem counters on it. And you can remove a gem counter to target creature can't attack or block this turn. So the problem with this card is for this card to have a good effect on the game, you have to spend a lot of mana to play it. Otherwise, it's gonna expire pretty soon. And you have to take a turn off to do that. Yes, you can tap all your lands except one, and then you can use it immediately. But I don't like this card. I think it's a D-. It's just it takes a lot to play, and at the end of the day, it doesn't do that much. This is no Icy Manipulator because it's gonna expire. And it can't hit lands either. Cranial Archive, 2 mana for an artifact. You can play 2, exile it, and target play shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library, draw a card. So I guess the idea is you have 2 uses for this. You can host a Dell, or you can make sure you don't get decked. Neither of those do much in limited. I will give it a D. Dragon Throne of Tarkir, 4 mana for a legendary artifact equipment. The creature has Defender and 2-tap. Other creature you control get trample and gets +X/+X until the end of turn X is this creature's power, and it keeps for free. So you have to play this, equip it, and then one of your creatures is taken out of combat. But you can pump up all your other creatures, and you can do it on defense. I was never a believer in this card. You have to spend expensive equipment, expensive equip cost. Yeah, one of your creatures is taken out, and maybe you can pump up your things. I'm gonna give it an F again. Ghostfire Blade, 1 mana for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2, equipped for free, but it costs 2 less if you target a colorless creature. So this is a great card with morph because morphs are colorless. So in a deck with like 7 or 8 morphs, I think this is about a B+. Otherwise, it's pretty bad. But you can also use it on artifact creatures, I guess. But it's a very powerful card with morphs. Heart Piercer Bow, 2 mana for an artifact equipment. When it attacks, it is 1 damage to target creature defending player controls, and it creeps for 1. There is no like the blue card in some core set you could find this card, so I would give it a D. Not a good card. It's just 1 damage per creature is too little. And we have another banner. Lens of Clarity, 1 mana for an artifact. You may look at the top card of your library and add face down creature you don't control. So it's an F. It's even worse than the Smoke Teller because you have to spend a card. That Smoke Teller at least was a 2/2 for 2. So I'm gonna give it an F. Don't play it. 3 banners, and then Ugin's Nexus. 5 mana artifact, legendary. If a player will begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Doesn't matter. And when we put into a graveyard from the battle, instead exile it and take an extra turn. So you have to play this, blow it up, and then you get a Time Walk. I would say that's not worth it. 5 mana Time Walks in limited are good, but they're not like bombs, I don't think. So I would probably give it an F. I just don't see why. Witness of the Ages. This is a nice card in some sense. This is a 6 mana 4/4, but it has morph 5. So this is a card you can put in any deck. You can unmorph it in any deck. It's not gonna be one of your best morphs, but it's just a reliable workhorse. So I will give it a C-, but it is nice to take it and know that you have a card that you can always play and always morph out. Then we have a cycle of the comes into play tapped land. Bloodfell Caves is a black-red one. It ends the battlefield tap, and they enter the battlefield, you gain 1 life, and it taps for black and red. One trick is that the enemy colored tap lands are much better, because the Bloodfell Caves is only good in Mardu. And but like for example, the Jungle Hollow is good in Absan and in Sultai. So I would give these cards around a C, and I would give the enemy colored one C+, especially the white-black one, because that also works in the 2-colored one. The fetch lands. So the fetch lands are all friendly colors, so they are sort of like the Bloodfell Caves. Then come into play, you pay 1 life, you sacrifice it, you search life for a swamp or a mountain. So it's only good in the Martyr deck, and that's about, I think the fetch lands are about C's. Now, the third type of lands are the tri-lands. I'm going to take Frontier Bivouac. They're coming to play tap, they add green, blue, or red. So these are much better because in the guild they're in, they just fixes your mana so nicely. It can even maybe enable you to pay something like a Hordeling Outburst. Yes. So let's say you first pick Frontier Bivouac. It's fantastic in Temur, but it's also good in Sultai, and it is good in Jeskai because it taps for 2 of the colors. So they are very nice first picks. I would give them a B minus, and they could almost feel like Bs in the if you're like Temur and have some rough mana and you are picking like this card. It's gonna you got probably pick it around a B. But as a first pick, I think they're about B minuses because they enable you super good in the free color, but also works in 2 of the other guilds. Okay, so I've talked about all this. Tomb of Spirit Dragon. Land that taps for colorless, and 2 tap, you gain 1 life for each colorless creature you control. So the idea is morphs, but you don't want to play a colorless land in a multicolored set. So I'm probably going to give it an F. I just don't see it. It's not worth it to gain some life. If you're drawing cards, like say you paid 5 mana to draw a card, then maybe, but life is just not worth it. Alright, so that was this set review. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want me to do more of these set reviews, please let me know in the comments.